Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we are working to bring you stories of people making a difference in their communities around the world, locally, globally, and in our case, digitally. The Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley is part of an organization called Rotary International, made up of people called Rotarians. There are 1.2 million Rotarians in 36,000 clubs around the world, and a big shout out to another 200,000 Rotaractors who are part of Rotary International as well. We are always excited to bring the stories of people who took a look at their community and said, you know, maybe we can do this a little bit differently. And our speaker today, about whom you read a little bit on the way into this part of the meeting page, is an American who moved to England and with a friend started an organization called Today Do This. And their story is one that I think you're going to really enjoy. We're excited to have you, Daianna, and I hand the mic over to you. Welcome to the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley.
Thanks so much for having me. All right, gosh, shall I just kind of launch in then?
Please do.
Let's do it. So I'm going to start just by rewinding briefly to the year 2000. So more than 20 years ago, when it was still very uncool, I decided that I wanted to help companies become more sustainable. And that was a word that at the time people were still struggling to define. And there weren't very many jobs doing that sort of thing when I came out of university. So I took whatever opportunities came along and managed to explore pretty much every sector along the way. I worked for the US EPA's, the Environmental Protection Agency's fledgling sustainability team. I did marketing for a boutique green architecture firm. I worked for foundations and charities and big corporates and consultancies and agencies. And I even did some work for Prince Charles for a spell. And after 15 years of all of that, I kind of started growing impatient at how many companies were sort of proudly waving around sustainability pledges and policies, and how little those things seemed to really change anything about the company's behavior. I'd worked in all these different environments, and I just sort of felt like I wasn't making a real impact. So I decided to start my own company and figure it out. And naively, I did things in that order. So having left the warm bosom of full-time employment and a steady paycheck, I had spent about a year trying to figure out what on earth I was doing, slipping sort of deeper and deeper into the entrepreneurial valley of despair, when events conspired to make things even worse. So by then, it was 2016, and there was bad news everywhere. So like you said, I'm actually the daughter of Venezuelan immigrants. I was born and raised in the US, and I was naturalized as a Brit. And the sort of division and despair in all of those countries and beyond that year was pretty overwhelming. And the only thing that people sort of seemed to agree on then, and probably still, no matter what their politics, was that the world was kind of heading in the wrong direction. And so everyone seemed to have a lot to say about kind of big and small p politics, but most of it was just that, was all talk. You know, diatribes on social media and at dinner parties, and over drinks at the pub. And some people had sort of taken to the streets in various protests, but relatively few people seemed to be kind of taking real practical action on to tackle the issues that they claim to care about. So I called up one of my most talented friends, an award-winning creative director called Robbie Dale. And I asked him, you know, can we come up with a way to make it easier for people to turn their good intentions into action? And can we do that with basically no budget, no money? And we're both pretty creative. So we quickly came up with this guerrilla campaign involving like a ream of recycled paper, a home office printer, and a bit of social media. And I won't bore you with the details, but within a week, that campaign had spread organically like all over the world, from Canada to Zambia, Moscow to Manila. People were getting involved. And it was picked up by some major media outlets, and they kept asking me, what next? I thought, next? We hadn't thought that far. But that spur of the moment, sort of passion-driven side project taught Robbie and I a few things. Number one, people are paying closer attention to what's going on in the world. Number two, they're pretty upset about it. And number three, if you make it really simple, they are willing to do something about it. We also learned something about ourselves and about each other, which was that we were both really determined to put the power to create change directly into the hands of millions of people, to sort of take, power from being something that the few have to something that the many can have. So we actually ended up doing two things next. We started a newsletter, taking one headline from the week's news and suggesting one simple action that people could take to make a difference. And we created a really simple kit, a product that combined Martin Luther King's 6 steps of nonviolent social change with some behavioral science in order to help people turn their good intentions into action. And that kit was very much a minimum viable product in its early stages. And we were determined to make sure it was doing the job that we wanted it to, or at least that it could. And so we sort of collared all our friends and family one by one. We gave them a kit, and we sort of peered at them while they used it, watched them really closely. And because they loved us, of course, they all said it was great. So we thought we better test this on some strangers. So we cobbled together a few sort of focus groups, and we peered at them. And to our delight, they also said it was great. But more importantly than that, we realized how powerful it was to bring people together around this sort of shared experience, because the products, the kit, was great at giving people a sense of agency and helping them take action. But the experience of sort of creating change alongside others was really transformational, which probably shouldn't have come as a surprise, because that's how change happens, right? The world as it is today is just the result of individuals, you, me, all of us doing things. And when we do things together in a more sort of coordinated way, we create bigger change faster and more intentionally. And so then the light bulb sort of went ding. Could this be the solution for getting companies beyond those pledges and policies that I had grown so sort of bored of to taking action on the issues that they claim to care about? Nowadays, CEOs are talking about the climate crisis, diversity, equity, and inclusion, ESG, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But most of them, maybe all of them, have no idea really how to actually deliver on those commitments. And meanwhile, people are increasingly holding them to account, and none more so really than their employees. If you think just over the past couple of years at companies like Google and Facebook and Disney and Nike and Spotify and Netflix and McKinsey and Ogilvy, and even smaller companies like the retailer Ted Baker here in the UK, workers have become really vocal in their opposition when their employers don't live up to their expectations on social and environmental issues. And I kind of think, why shouldn't they be? For many of us, work takes up, around half of our waking lives. People are increasingly looking for meaning and purpose in their work, and sort of gravitating away from employers that they don't feel aligned with their values. And I think it's hard to live with that cognitive dissonance of, tweaking the algorithm to make your app more addictive for users when you don't let your kids have their own phone, or shilling unhealthy food when you insist on keeping fit yourself, or propping up the fossil fuel industry when your teenager is skipping school to go to climate protests. So we organized some workshops using our kit and our 6-step process for going from intention to action, and a method that we developed for helping people connect an issue that they care about with their skills and talents and sort of sphere of influence at work. And we promoted these as how to change the world in your day job. And they were a hit. All of a sudden we had a finance manager making the business case for a net zero climate target, a procurement director changing the bidding process to prioritize minority-owned businesses, a product marketer creating like a repair and resell program for their customers. I remember there was like an admin assistant that was committed to sourcing only vegan and vegetarian food for meetings, and then those people started asking us what next. How could they help their colleagues start changing the world in their day jobs? And that sort of brought me back full circle, really, to helping companies be more sustainable. I'd always wanted to prove that you can make money by making a difference. What these days, people call purpose-led business, or community interest companies, or B Corps. And now Robbie and I have built this sort of sustainable business model that allows us to make a much bigger difference. So today, at Today Do This, we work with companies committed to making a more positive social impact. And we support business leaders who realize that the only way that they are going to achieve that is by empowering employees across the organization to change the world in their day jobs. Because the daily decisions of every worker in every part of the business have an impact on people and planet, from how they do their commute and work travel, to how people are hired and promoted, from whether innovation solves more problems than it creates, to the resources and waste that are created through every business decision. And there are so many sort of issues and challenges that weave through all those different business decisions that even the most well-intentioned leaders struggle, because they're just not sure sort of what to focus on, or how to empower their employees to do anything on any of those issues. So for companies at kind of the really early stages of figuring out what's important, we bring employees' voices into those decisions, and not just the most vocal voices, but everyone's voice. So for a well-known swimwear brand, we've done interviews and surveys and other research to find out what topics workers feel the company needs to address. By talking to the people on the ground, product designers, packaging specialists, merchandisers, and such, the concerns that they raise are much more likely to relate to core business practices like supplier arrangements and production methods and product attributes and things like that. And that makes those initiatives then more likely to stick later on. Also really important to involve workers in building the company's impact strategy, sort of setting out really clear priorities and measurable targets to guide what the business should sort of focus its resources on. So for an outdoor equipment brand, we're running meetings and workshops to get input from a whole cross-section of employees across every major department in the business. And their different sort of perspectives and experience are helping to hone the strategy and identify challenges and improve the collaboration and coordination, and that's going to be needed for implementation of all that stuff later on. But what I personally get most excited about is activation. So once a company has an impact strategy, making sure that everyone in the business understands how it's relevant to their day-to-day work and what it is that they can do personally to contribute. Because most executives sort of leave employee engagement on this kind of stuff at a slide deck or a video presentation or a blog on the internet, or maybe some posters in the office. And it's a recipe for failure and disappointment, frankly. The real challenge isn't changing people's minds so much as it is changing their behavior. So we've been working with lots of different businesses, one of the world's biggest pharma companies, an American media brand, a European engineering company, to help their workers connect the organization's social and environmental goals to their own daily decisions and responsibilities. And we do that by asking 3 questions. Number 1, what are the skills and responsibilities inherent in your role? Number two, which of the company's impact priorities sort of most grabs your interest? And number three, what can you start doing right now to advance that priority in your day-to-day work? And then we take them through that sort of 6-step process to start turning those good ideas and intentions into action right then and there. So at that European engineering company that I mentioned, there's now someone in R&D leading a sustainability stream at their next Innovation Week. At the American media brand we're working with, a journalist has started focusing their attention on telling the stories of Black women entrepreneurs. At that global pharma company, there's a salesperson who's eliminating all the paper marketing materials that they send to healthcare professionals, which they know go straight into the bin. And sort of leaving those activities to just a small siloed CSR team is just no longer a viable approach, because employees of all stripes want to get involved. And that's a really good thing, because involving them is much more constructive than waiting for them to sort of protest outside of HQ or publish an open letter in the newspaper or unleash a campaign on social media. And frankly, that's if you're lucky. That's if your employees, really care about the company and want to create change. Because most employees who feel that their day-to-day work experience doesn't reflect their values or the stated values of the company are really likely to leave. But on the other hand, employees who do feel that their day-to-day work is in line with their values are more motivated to contribute to the company's success. They treat each other better, they have better ideas. There was a study by the Center for Economic Studies several years back that found that employees who feel that they're working toward some sort of good cause are 30% more productive. And all that stuff adds up to better business performance. So I guess my question would just be, what's stopping you if you're not doing this stuff already?
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Daianna. It's great to get the story of a move from something that is a care to something that is a business model. Actually, I'm quite interested in that. I'll hand it over to Raj for the Q&A, but first introduce those who are on the recording. My name is Rushton Hurley. I'm in San Jose, California. Also with us is Raj Bhandari, all here in the Bay Area as well. Rory Olson in Houston, Texas. Our guest, Janine Chu, part of Fit to Be Hired, a Bay Area effort. And Daianna, what a pleasure. What a pleasure to have you. And I'm excited to hear the questions that our team has. And Raj, I'll hand it over to you.
Hello, Daianna, from all of us on the recording and also all of us watching virtually all over the world who are part of our club. I want to start, Rushton. It seems like you have a question. If anybody here has a question, please raise your hand in the chat window and we'll take them accordingly. Rushton, it seems like you have a question. Would you like to start?
I do. Daianna, in taking this to where you're working with companies about how they help their employees get involved in things they care about, my guess is that you've run across 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 really creative examples of things that companies have done. Is that something that you can share, just to talk about the examples of companies doing right by their employees quite creatively?
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of individual, I think, to each company and frankly to kind of each person. So there's some I'm wondering whether to give you an example of kind of at the company level or the individual one. I'll try a little bit of both. In companies where there's a sort of really big general goal, like we want to reach net zero carbon emissions by X year, and they have a whole variety of different types of staff, office staff, technical staff, people who are working with supply chains that are sort of spread all across the world. You get a really huge variety of examples of like how people take that and internalize it and make it kind of part of their day-to-day work. So for example, I think one of the examples that I gave before of the admin assistant who said that she was just going to start ordering vegan and vegetarian meals for meetings in the office, that was directly tied to that sort of net zero strategy, because of course vegetarian and vegan is a lot less carbon intensive than sort of meat. So that was kind of her, contribution within her sphere of influence. Like what she could do was she ordered the food for meetings. And so that's what she was going to do. And then you had, somebody at a much more senior level and a much more technical role in the company saying, I'm gonna change our procurement policy so that this certain kind of chemical or pharmaceutical that I know has a huge environmental impact, that we're using alternatives that are less carbon intensive. And so I get really excited when people go beyond the obvious stuff, and we're always happy to have the obvious things like I'm gonna start taking public transit more to work. That's great. Like if that's the thing that gets you excited, brilliant. But if it's something that you can sort of weave into how the company itself does business, those are the things that I get really, really excited about. And there have been some really creative ideas from, I remember somebody who was in a customer service role who was going to start looking at ways to sort of make the customer service for the company much more accessible to people with different sort of disabilities and things. So it's always, it depends on kind of like what the company's goals and aims are, and how creative the people who work with us are in the ideas and how passionate they are about the things that they come up with.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks, Justin, for the question, and thanks, Daianna, for the examples that challenge us to be creative in our own worlds. Rory, did you have a question? I think you're on mute, Rory.
Okay, can you hear me now? All right. Today is July 20th, 2022. I say that because before I came to this recording, I read the Wall Street Journal online. And there was a very interesting article in the journal. There are some colleges and universities who are thriving because they've been sort of tending to the financial books, and they seem to be asset rich, where there are lots of other schools. And I gave the example of one school, it was Mills College. They got wrapped up in all this nice stuff, which really didn't help the bottom line. And eventually Mills College had to sell some assets, like they had a Shakespeare's first folio. They had to sell that, bring in $10 million to be able to make it through the academic year. And then when the year was over, they sold out to another school, and they gave other examples. And when I was listening to our speaker speak, I'm not arguing it or pushing it one way or another. I was just wondering, with all this stuff to make people feel good, is anybody checking as to what it will do to the bottom line? Because after all, businesses are there to make a profit. If they don't make a profit, they aren't there anymore. So I was just curious, is this worked into what you're talking about?
Yeah, 100%. So there have been studies for decades now looking at companies that pay attention to sort of the impact on the world around them and how they compare to companies that don't. And they do tend to overperform. And I can send around studies or something afterwards if that would be useful. But what I would say is really important in order to make sure that that is what happens is a few things. So I think often when organizations, you gave some academic examples there, but this is probably even more relevant when it's a profit-driven company, where sort of improving your impact on society and making money don't align is when companies make a few different mistakes. One of those mistakes is when companies sort of still conflate impact with philanthropy. So volunteering time or donating money or maybe even some of their ad spend to causes that are totally unrelated to the core business. And I'm not saying that companies shouldn't engage in any philanthropy, but just sort of throwing some money or a volunteering day at a cause isn't the same as understanding where your company makes the biggest impact on people and planet in the course of business and improving that. And then you have sort of at the other end of the spectrum, companies that think that they have to respond to every hot button issue that is dominating the news cycle. Or they worry that that's what they'll have to do if they show any acknowledgement that their company could do better, could treat their customers and their employees and their communities better. And no one company is going to solve all of the world's problems, nor is that what anybody expects. But it is fair to expect companies to know where they are doing the most harm based on their business model and where they could do most good based on their core competencies, and then put targets and plans in place to do less harm and more good. When you look at it from a perspective of, and this is the questions that we sort of ask companies when we work with them to make sure that the strategies that they come up with are going to have a positive impact on the bottom line, is where are you having the most negative impacts? Importantly, what are your strengths? Like as a company or as a brand, what is it that you're really good at? What are your core competencies, your core capabilities? And how can you solve those problems using the things that you're best at? And how can you have everybody within the business in their part of the business, because they are the experts in their department, in their sphere of work? How can we get them involved in figuring out what are those problems and what are the strengths, and how can you solve those problems using your strengths? Because in that way, it ensures that what the company is doing is intrinsically tied to the way that the business works and isn't just, some kind of airy-fairy thing that has nothing to do with how money is made and how business is done.
If I can just add a comment, when I was a lot younger, this was back after the 70s, oil was jacked up. So everybody in Texas went crazy doing drilling and stuff like that. Then the early 80s, OPEC changed its mind and we had a lot of bankruptcies. And as a young lawyer, I spent a lot of time in bankruptcy court listening to hearings where they got to my client's hearing eventually. So that sort of taught me that, it's really good, because back in the 70s, there was lots of charitable activity that businesses did, but geez, in the 80s, a lot of them went into bankruptcy court. And what I remember, if you were in Houston, do you remember Ninfa's restaurant?
Yes.
Okay. Great place. Unfortunately, she's not with us anymore, but more to the point, I was waiting to get into a creditors meeting for a bankruptcy, and I realized I was going to be there all year because Ninfa's restaurants and Mama Ninfa personally were going through a bankruptcy, and they literally had the biggest room in the federal courthouse just to fit in everybody so they could ask their questions. And, it's really good to be virtuous, but it's also very good to turn a profit. So I just pass that on for what it's worth based on my experiences.
I agree, they are both important. And I am really intrigued to hear that there was a Mama Ninfa. I didn't realize.
Yeah, no, actually, she was married to a man who was in a related restaurant business, and they got the idea to open up down in Navigation. And then that was the first restaurant. And then they kept expanding, and everything was great until it wasn't.
I think we'll ramp down from there, just taking a look at our program scheduling. Thank you so much for the Wall Street and Journal inspired conversation and the difficult conversations about how to find that balance between sustainability of the organization and also sustainability for the larger world. Daianna, your thoughts on that were much appreciated. Rushan, I'll leave it to you to take us into the home stretch.
Absolutely. Thank you to everyone who has joined us for this recording. You may be watching this on our YouTube channel. You may be watching it on our club's webpage. And if you are doing the latter, we hope that you'll keep scrolling down a little farther and do the form that lets us know you are here. For visiting Rotarians, by putting in your email address properly, you'll get a generated email that you can pass along to your club secretary to make up a miss. And then a little farther down the page, there is the Discuss forum, DISQUS, and you are welcome there to create an account if you don't have one and leave some comments. What did you think of this program? What did you think of other elements of the meeting? You can reply to other people's comments as well. It's one of the ways in an online and asynchronous club we work with each other and share ideas. So with that, I'd like to, first of all, thank Raj, my programs committee buddy, for being part of the team today. Very, very cool. And Daianna for her program. And we will hand it back to Daianna for a final word. Daianna, the mic is back to you.
Sure. I guess I need to end with some specific actions that Rotarians can take, because like I said, Today Do This is entirely about action, and we tend never to really do talks without making sure that there's some kind of action at the end of it. So I've got 3 simple actions that Rotarians can take. Number 1, you can visit todaydothis.com and get in touch with us if if you want to improve your company's impact on people and planet and profit. You can also sign up to our newsletter there. We call it Do Something About the Newsletter, because every Friday you hear from us with one story taken from the week's news headlines and one simple action that you can take that day to make a difference on that issue. It's been named one of the world's top 50 newsletters and is featured in The Guardian and Ethos magazine and Future Crunch and a whole bunch of other places. And number 3, we're also looking to reach more businesses by speaking or running workshops at conferences and events. So if you have a sort of favorite business event that you'd like to see us at, or you're involved in organizing something like that, you can reach me on hello@todaydothis.com.
Perfect. Thank you, Daianna, and thank you, everyone. We will see you next week.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.